más, señoras y señores, tengan todos ustedes muy buenos días. A nombre de FISA del grupo GL Events, queremos darle la más cordial de las bienvenidas a este segundo día de exhibición de ExpoNaval 2022, que es además el comienzo del Congreso Internacional que hemos titulado Los desafíos para una condición marítima en el siglo XXI. Queremos agradecer a nuestras empresas auspiciadoras que hacen posible que estemos reunidos hoy aquí y durante los próximos 2 días, a Airbus Naval Group, a Tech Chile, a SAB, a Antena Lab, a Martin UAB, a Teledyne FLIR y a MTG. Y por supuesto también queremos agradecer el agradecimiento a nuestros patrocinadores, a la Armada de Chile, al Ministerio de Defensa y al Puerto de Valparaíso. Para comenzar esta jornada, quiero dejar con ustedes al señor Rodrigo Lobo, director ejecutivo de ExpoNaval, quien dirá unas palabras de bienvenida y a quien pido recibamos con un aplauso.
Muy buenos días a todos. La verdad es que nunca me imaginé en mi carrera naval de capitán de navío y llegar a una instancia como esta frente a tan selecto grupo de almirantes. Quiero darle la bienvenida, quiero agradecerles sinceramente a nombre de FISA que hoy día nos puedan acompañar en esta tan importante conferencia. Antes de comenzar mis palabras, también quiero hacer un especial reconocimiento y saludo al Second almirante Martin Connell, que nos acompaña el día de hoy y que ha viajado desde muy lejos, a los comandantes en jefe de la Armada de Argentina. También veo por ahí al almirante Márquez también de Colombia, con quien ya hemos hecho un conocimiento y una amistad. Voy a decir unas breves palabras para poder introducir este seminario. Chile es un país esencialmente marítimo. Así lo evidencia su configuración geográfica que permite caracterizar a nuestro territorio continental sudamericano como una verdadera isla, con desiertos al norte, cordillera al este y mar al oeste y al sur. A este Chile se añaden sus islas oceánicas, Pascua, Sala y Gómez, San Félix y Juan Fernández, y nuestro territorio antártico, todos los cuales dependen fuertemente del mar para su sobrevivencia. Por otra parte, Chile sudamericano tiene un ancho máximo no superior a 370 kilómetros en la latitud de Antofagasta, comparativamente con los 4.200 kilómetros lineales de litoral que tenemos, que contiene cerca de 3.000 islas, generando un total de 83.800 kilómetros de contorno de costa. A esto se suma que la superficie del territorio continental chileno, de 756.600 kilómetros cuadrados, es superada en más de 6 veces por los 4,63 millones de kilómetros cuadrados de zona económica exclusiva y proyección de la plataforma continental bajo la jurisdicción nacional. Definitivamente somos un país de puro mar. Por muchos años, la solitaria prédica de unas pocas voces, entre ellas la Armada, en cuanto a la potencialidad marítima de Chile, no tuvo mucho eco. Tal vez porque se estrechaba contra la impronta agrícola y minera de nuestro país, que veía al mar como algo lejano, complejo y riesgoso. La geografía nos imponía un destino marítimo que el alma nacional se negaba a aceptar. Afortunadamente, las cosas han ido gradualmente cambiando y cada día existe mayor conciencia de la importancia cultural, política y económica que posee el Océano Pacífico, que es el océano del siglo XXI. El mar ya no es considerado una barrera, sino fuente de riquezas y punto de unión y contacto de otros pueblos que viven a su alrededor. Este es un ejemplo de lo que estoy hablando. Un ejemplo de este cambio es que hoy nos encontramos en este congreso de la feria de la industria naval más importante de Latinoamérica, junto a destacados expositores y panelistas para discutir respecto a los desafíos de una condición marítima del siglo XXI. Muchos de los asistentes a esta feria esperamos aprender, me incluyo, las lecciones de países marítimos y que se exponen y que sus exponentes nos ilustrarán respecto a la relevancia de ser una potencia marítima y posteriormente podremos discutir y analizar a Chile y su política oceánica nacional y argumentar si realmente somos una potencia marítima. Seguramente podremos analizar qué está pasando con los desafíos que hoy se presentan en el ámbito marítimo, tales como la pesca ilegal, el cambio climático, el crimen organizado transnacional, entre otros importantes desafíos. Para este congreso hemos invitado a los mejores expositores para analizar estos temas y estoy seguro de que las preguntas de los asistentes enriquecerán las discusiones y las conclusiones de este relevante tema. Permítame finalizar estas breves palabras agradeciendo profundamente a todos los expositores que hoy día nos acompañan. Varios de ellos han concurrido desde el extranjero y a las instituciones que lo patrocinan, especialmente al Centro de Estudios Athena Lab, a quien agradezco profundamente el apoyo que nos han brindado, a la Academia de Guerra Naval, al King College de Londres y al Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores. Muchas gracias nuevamente por estar aquí y a disfrutar de este maravilloso congreso. Gracias.
Agradecemos las palabras del director ejecutivo de ExpoNaval 2022, Rodrigo Lobo. A continuación tengo el honor de dejar con ustedes al excomandante en jefe de la Real Armada Australiana, el vicealmirante Michael Noonan, quien nos dará una clase magistral y luego de la cual vamos a tener una pausa para el café. Así es que recibamos con un gran aplauso al vicealmirante Noonan.
Buenos dias, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you today. I'm both honoured and very proud to be back in the beautiful city of Valparaiso with my dear friends and colleagues. I would particularly like to thank Athena Lab and my very good friend, Admiral Julio Leva, for the invitation to be part of ExpoNaval 2022. And of course, I thank Admiral Juan Andres de la Maza and all of my very good friends in the Chile Navy. I'd also like to thank and congratulate Pfizer for putting together this wonderful Naval Expo. The topic for this session today is being a maritime power and its implications. And while I intend to speak from an Australian perspective and as a practitioner, it's important to note that this is not a new subject. And this year marks 100 years since the passing of Sir Julian Corbett, who remains one of the great theorists of maritime power of all time. And he would no doubt be delighted to see conferences such as this continuing to challenge us to continue to think about what it means to be a maritime power. Gracias. So today, I want to challenge you to think about maritime power from multiple perspectives, not just naval power, but also from the perspective of what it means to be a maritime nation. Understanding what it means to be a maritime power is as important today as it has ever been. And it's equally important for small and medium powers as it is for great powers. In defining a maritime nation, in 2005, Commodore Richard Menhennick of the Royal Australian Navy said, "A maritime nation could be defined as a nation in which the maritime environment impacts extensively in the geographic, economic, and strategic dimension. Even if these factors are all a reality, the nation will remain an incomplete nation, a flawed entity in the maritime dimension if the psychology of its people is not rooted in the sea." And this is the case for Australia. As an island continent, there is no doubt that Australia is a maritime nation. Yet, in 2020, despite the fact that 85% of Australia's 25 million people live within 50 kilometres of the sea, most Australians, if not most people in the world, still think about the character of Australia as being defined by the Great Outback and the man from Snowy River. And our nation's defence policy and defence force remains inextricably linked to the Anzac legend and the continental defence of Australia. Who here has been to the US and had a blooming onion at an Outback restaurant? Yet, quite a few of you. Well, I can assure you that neither the restaurant chain or the blooming onion actually exist in Australia. Australia's maritime jurisdiction is vast. The Australian Security Forces Authority Area, also known as our Search and Rescue region, stretches from the mid-Indian Ocean, north to the equator, east to continental Australia, and then south along the Antarctic coast. This region is nearly 53 million square kilometres, or 1/10 of the Earth's surface, and borders the search and rescue regions of 10 other countries. Yet we have a modest navy of just over 15,000 people, 14 capital ships, 6 submarines, although that is going to change, and 12 patrol boats. We do not have a Coast Guard, but we do have a Maritime Border Command, which consists of around about 1,500 people and 8 patrol boats. But as we look at trade, Australia is the 5th largest user of shipping services in the world. Over 99% of Australia's imports and exports by volume and almost 90% by value are dependent upon shipping. The combined value of Australia's seagoing international imports and exports is over $600 billion a year. When we think about the importance of maritime trade, it's interesting to put some dates and figures against this. So in the month, and certainly this year, as the world's population is expected to reach 8 billion people, it's worthwhile to think what this means in terms of maritime trade. In 1955, the year the modern shipping container is considered to have been invented, albeit with further refinement, the world's population was around about 2.8 billion people, a little over 1/3 of what it is today. In 1843, when the first ship constructed of iron was launched, the Great Britain, the world's population was half or even less of the size it was in 1955. So why does this matter? Because iron and then steel ships, bulk carriers, tankers and container ships have transformed global maritime trade. They have not done so conceptually. Global maritime trade has been around for thousands of years. But the innovation in maritime trade have changed the scale, the efficiency, and the predictability of global maritime trade. And by doing so, it has transformed the lives of billions of people. And while the world is not without its challenges, the number of people who can live or aspire to secure and prosperous lives has been transformed by modern shipping. So when we think and talk of maritime trade and maritime power, it is important to remember just how much it matters to each and every one of us. Just how much it has enabled a transformation in our lifetime, and how it has meant not just for small powers, but what it also means for great powers. And speaking of great powers, my next challenge to you is to not see everything solely through the terms and the lens of the great power rivalry between the United States and China. It is obviously important, but small and middle powers do have a vital role to play to influence and shape how great powers behave. And we should also remember that more than 3/4 of the world's population live in nations outside of the United States and China. Yes, there is a lot going on in the rest of the world. I'd like to talk a little bit about challenges that we have all experienced over the last few years. When I took over as the Chief of Navy in Australia in 2018, a global pandemic was the furthest thing from my mind. Yet, the last 3 years have seen a drastic change in the way that my Defence Force, and particularly the Australian Navy, conducts business, and I know that that is the same for all of us here today. The current aim of the Australian Navy is to remain vigilant as we navigate through what is the new normal, the persistent COVID-19 environment. And currently, in Australia, there are more COVID-19 cases than there were in July 2020. So it's important for our Navy that we are able to protect ourselves, our loved ones, and prevent our Navy being the centre of a major hotspot. In order to do this, we have had to reshape our thinking and the way that we do work in the maritime environment. And the main aim now, going forward, is to maintain naval capability while safeguarding the health and safety and well-being of all people in our community. We were able to keep our Navy relatively safe. We learnt lessons from things that were happening around the world, and certainly in those early days where we saw the USS Roosevelt and the Charles de Gaulle severely affected by the effects of COVID-19. We learnt from this, and we did everything we could in terms of centralising our control of measures to keep our Navy safe. And I was particularly proud of the fact that throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, we were able to keep our ships at sea. This said, as a Navy, we had to provide almost 1,000 people to specific COVID-19 taskings, including border checkpoints, quarantine, and assisting specialist skills in delivering the vaccine most needed around the country. And these people were drawn from our ships, from our headquarters, and from our capability environments around the country. In terms of regional presence, we had to look at the way we kept our ships at sea. And what this meant was significantly changing the operational tempo of the way we deployed our ships. HMAS Parramatta spent 70 days at sea in her first deployment during COVID. We then saw the tanker Sirius spent 96 days straight at sea in support of replenishment operations for both Australia and international units. And the frigate HMAS Arunta spent a record 164 days at sea and maintained an extended regional presence in the Asia Pacific. Now, while we proved that we could do this, it doesn't mean that we should do this. And the effects of keeping ships at sea for long periods of time, we are now paying the price for that in terms of retention. But I'm very proud to say that we are back and able to conduct port visits around the world again. For Australia, the pandemic certainly challenged us, but we also had another challenge. Operation Bushfire Assist challenged the Australian Defence Force, and in particular our Navy, from December 2019 through to the early months of 2020. In excess of 24 million hectares of Australian country was burnt. 33 lives were lost, including 7 Australian and US firefighters. More than 3,000 homes were destroyed, and thousands of buildings and Indigenous culture heritage sites were damaged. HMAS Jules, one of our amphibious lift ships, departed Mallacoota for the area of Hastings and was part of the initial response of 3 ships that we mobilised to evacuate people and provide essential services to those seaborne cities. the Choules was able to embark 1,225 people, 113 dogs, 3 cats, 1 rabbit, and a parakeet. And significantly, this was the first time that the Royal Australian Navy had been used to evacuate Australians in need in times of bushfires in Australia. So the changing nature of climate and the growing reliance upon our Defence Force to support the whole of government efforts in humanitarian aid and disaster relief is seeing a changing role for our Navy. In terms of a strategic update, I wanted to provide you with a little bit of a taste of what's happening in Australia as we look to the future and our future force. The strategic update released by the previous government on the 1st of July 2020 may very well be the most important piece of strategic doctrine released in Australia's defence history. It commits over $180 billion to our Navy, and this does not include the AUKUS program and our future nuclear-powered submarines. It is clear it provides instruction to the Commonwealth of Defence to prepare for a strategic environment in which there is a strategic competition between the United States and China, and that will drive the posture of all countries in the Indo-Pacific region. We have a determination and a mandate for higher potential of military conflict in our region, and there is shorter, if not no warning time for defence planning moving forward. We see a rising potential of grey zone activities in our region, and defence will be required to continue to posture for natural disasters and COVID-19 moving forward. But we now have a very dependent and determined defence strategy based around shaping our environment, deterring aggression, and being ready to respond if required to do so. So what makes maritime power? I would put to you that maritime power is largely a function of geography when there is a conscious decision made to use the ocean for the prosperity and the security of the nation state. We, as naval practitioners and maritime strategists, have an obligation to educate and raise public awareness about what it means to be a maritime nation. And I know that successive CNOs and Chiefs of Navy around the world do this regularly through seminars, conferences such as this, fleet reviews, and even writing books, albeit this is one retired Chief of Navy that is not going to write a book. But it's very important, and certainly, as I alluded to, Australia continues to suffer from what we call sea blindness. We have a role, an important role, to continue to educate our people, our countrymen, and our political class as to how important maritime powers are to our maritime nations. We need to be present, and we need to engage nationally, regionally, and globally. And I'm very proud to have stood alongside Chile in a number of international forums over my time as the Chief of Navy. The Western Pacific Naval Symposium brings together 21 like-minded countries to consider the security of the Indian and Pacific Oceans. The South Pacific Ministers' Conference, RIMPAC, and our own Kakadu exercises are examples of where we come together and practice our maritime skills, we build trust and confidence so that if we do ever have to work together, we can do so seamlessly in the maritime environment. And I'm very delighted to have been able to lead the development of a deeper relationship between the Chilean and the Australian navies, which will see the formalisation of a Navy-to-Navy relationship between our two countries in 2023. In moving forward, we have an obligation to think about, drive and foster the building of capability and capacity to operate successfully together, and so that we can deliver effects from the sea when required to do so. So I put to you that geography defines maritime nations, but to truly understand the maritime environment and what it means to be part of it, and being able to project power from the sea is what defines a maritime power. In an era where the unrestricted use of the global commons is more important than ever before, it is vital that maritime nations further develop capacity and the capability to enforce the international rules-based order in order to preserve the way of life against those who may seek to threaten it. Ladies and gentlemen, gracias. Thank you for your opportunity to be friends and to draw our very important maritime nations together. I certainly believe that Australia and Chile are great, small, gusting, medium-sized maritime powers, and I look forward to the questions that we will discuss during the panel session. Gracias.
Agradecemos esta presentación del vicealmirante Michael Noonan y es un momento ahora de hacer una breve pausa. No es tan breve, una pausa para el café, es algo más de 30 minutos, 40 minutos, porque vamos a regresar a las 10:30 con el primer panel sobre la relevancia de ser una potencia marítima. Que disfruten esta pausa para el café, nos vemos pronto.